If there's one thing that I love sharing with clients, it is a bit of my story, because it's easy to look at me now and assume that I've always been fit or strong, and even though I'm not as strong or as fit as other people, I've definitely not always been as strong and fit as I am now. And a lot of the people that have met me in the last 15 years or have trained with me in the last almost 14 years, usually they assume that I have always been a jock or have always been athletic, and that's definitely not the case. And the reason I love that is because I want to inspire hope. That's the biggest drive for me in working with others, is bringing hope to whatever aspect of the journey that they are on, and no matter what specific struggle they are experiencing, whether it's like a hormone balance thing, or overweight or underweight, or fatigue, or anxiety, or whatever, I can totally empathize with you, and I know what it's like to struggle for years, not knowing what is going on and trying to figure it out and trying to do all the things you know that you're supposed to do and have it not work. So I want to share a brief version of my physical health journey with you, so that you understand where I'm coming from when I talk about my passion for health and fitness. I remember from as early as 3 years old feeling extreme fatigue and just being worn out. I am the oldest of six, but there's 4 boys in a row within 5 years, and I remember as a young kid just noticing and feeling within my body that I didn't have the energy that it seemed that my younger brothers had, and I had a hard time keeping up with them. There were like key moments where I would have to pull out everything that I had to maintain my oldest brother status. But in general, I felt just so exhausted all the time. And my dad thought I was lazy, so he had talks with me about being lazy, being afraid of work. He would say stuff like, it was all pretty extreme. There was a lot of anger and controlling, and it was all had a religious bent to it. But there were a few things, like if there were some wrinkles in the bed that I'd made, he would tell me that if I were in the Marines, I'd get kicked out by now. Or another thing he would say is if I had a job, a real job, because I did work for him, I'd be fired by now. And so I was always trying to get his approval. I was always trying to be strong enough, be good enough, and I was always this close and always failing. And so I used a lot of mental muscle to kind of push through. But in my teens specifically, I remember waking up and just feeling my energy tank, my overall energy to move was like 50-60%, and I could feel it draining throughout the day. And it wasn't like just having sore muscles and, needing to push through. It was like the actual energy to move my body and to function and to think was draining away from me. And that was super scary, because that was supposed to be my youth, my vigorous season of life. So like, what was it going to be later on in my 30s or 40s or beyond? Like, if I even could live that long, based on how it felt. I found out when I was 15 I was allergic to sugar. So there was a significant difference between when I had sugar or sugary things versus when I didn't. And so anything that was more on the complex side of the food spectrum that digested slower, so like protein and complex carbs was better. And anything on the easier to digest side, like fruit all the way to actual sugar, was just made it so much worse. Like actual quivery muscles, couldn't focus my eyes, couldn't remember what I was thinking, hardly had the strength to stand, felt super depressed, like this overwhelming sense of impending doom, just really tired and fatigued. So if I had sugar, all of those were full on 100% symptoms for around 12-24 hours. And if I ate more complex carbs and protein, then I felt a little more stable, little more steady. And so that's as much as I knew until I started training or preparing for the Marines. I rebelled and signed up for the Marines, and so I was right around my 22nd birthday. I started training. I joined the Marines like a week after my birthday, or signed up for it, swore in, and I ended up going to boot camp 6 months later. But in that time, I had a little bit more freedom for the first time in my life because of the controlling environment that I grew up in. And so I borrowed my mom's calorie count book, started figuring out, like, I got tested for my basal metabolic rate, so my daily metabolism, and so I used the calorie count book to figure out how many calories I needed. And so probably for the first time in my life, or at least in those later years, I was eating close to the right amount of food for my metabolism. And before that, I could not get heavier than 120 pounds. I was 5'8" at 15, and I couldn't get heavier than 120 pounds, so I was pretty skinny, so 115, 120. And then after I started doing my own blender drinks and like tracking my calories, I got up to 130 pounds for the first time in my life, and I just thought this was awesome. So excited about that. And I was working out, and I know a big factor in that time for achieving some strength was the fact that I was owning my life for the first time. I didn't feel powerless in my life the way I had felt most of my growing up years. Just super powerless. Like I had no control, no say in my own life. And so I was taking charge at that point and choosing my own direction. And I know, like, psychologically that had a whole bunch of ramifications for my physical health. And so that was a positive experience as I was getting ready for the Marines. And then, of course, I hit boot camp, and 100 times more controlling, 100 times more demeaning, and 100 times more powerless in my own life. So 3 months of boot camp, and it was the most miserable 3 months of my life. Like, I just physically, like, almost every cell in my body felt like it was screaming at me. There were times I wasn't sure I was going to make it. I wanted to pass out, never could, because there visibly, other than just being thin, there was nothing seemingly wrong with me. Even the blood work didn't show anything wrong. And so then on 10 weeks, or the 10 days leave between boot camp and combat training and the rest of my training, I was at home, and my mom, on a hunch, had me tested for hypothyroid hypoadrenia with her naturopath, and turns out I was super low on both of those. So those are two of the three energy hormones, not including testosterone for me. And so those were so low, they said I never should have physically been able to complete boot camp. So she got the results after I went back to training, and it was on one of the calls home on a weekend during combat training that she told me the results. So that made me feel a little bit better about the fact that I wasn't lazy, that the only reason I made it through boot camp was all the years of building mental muscle, just pushing myself to do stuff that I really was not physically able to do. And so altogether it was 6 months of active training before I transferred to the reserve unit, and the next few months I was a zombie. Like I'd been drained so much that I would sleep for like 12 hours a night and just feel brain dead all throughout the day. And after a while, I just decided I can't, after a few months of that, I decided I can't keep living like this. So I looked for part-time work, but I also started my exercise routine of just like one muscle group a day. I would keep my whole body in a state of peace and calm and kind of a meditative state, and I'd work one muscle group for that day. I didn't do any cardio at that point because that just took me down, and so I would just strengthen one muscle group or wear down one muscle group a day, and then doing it that carefully, that limited, I actually had enough energy to recover and strengthen that one muscle group. And every day I did one muscle group, worked through the body, and then repeated. And I had to force myself to eat every 2 hours. I had set reminders, timer to eat every 2 hours because it was just not a habit in my life. And so I've found as a trainer since then, with all the I've guesstimate I've worked with over 2,000 people, but people that have had like very stressful situations in their lives, and they're on like kind of hypervigilant, or they have PTSD or things like that, those people do better with regular meals throughout the day. Other people can do really well with like intermittent fasting, where they're going long periods of the day without food. That seems to work really well for people that haven't experienced a lot of extreme trauma or don't have autoimmune issues or whatever. But so you have to figure that out for yourself and kind of feel that out, test it out, what's best for you and your body. But so that those things were helpful, and so little by little over those early and mid 20s, I was getting stronger a little at a time. And then I met a lady. I was working for the Y at the time. We did a health fair, and a couple tables down from me, I met a lady, Dr. Nancy Lack. She is in Corvallis, Oregon, and I booked an appointment with her. She does nutrition response testing. Look that up. I've got some other friends that do that now from my Facebook friends list. And she was able to test me every week at first, and then kind of backing off little by little till we were doing once a month. But in 2 months, my thyroid or my adrenals tested at 100%. And in 5 months, my thyroid tested at 100%. She was able to test my body and figure out exactly what nutrients both needed, and kind of adjust my nutrient intake, supplement intake, to help strengthen those areas and get those organs functioning as high as possible. And so, and I still see her on a kind of a maintenance schedule. But one thing I noticed along the way, and the reason I'm so passionate about life coaching, which I also am a life coach, is that I noticed that my mental strength and confidence as a person kind of increased along with my physical strength. And as I gained some muscle, gained some strength, pretty soon my confidence would go up. And as I gained confidence in different areas, and I could tell Like in certain arenas, I was owning myself more and owning my knowledge more and showing more confidence. I noticed I made some progress physically as well, and I know that all areas of our lives are interconnected. There's 8 dimensions of wellness, including finances and environment and occupation and social aspects, and mental, emotional, spiritual, physical. All of those things tie together, and I think the thing that I am most passionate about is like when you can own yourself and own your life and own your dreams and truly become who you are and not live for anyone else, or try to change who you are to be what someone else sees as ideal or wants you to be, then you can truly be your authentic self, and you become powerful and strong, not just physically but mentally, emotionally, spiritually as well, because every aspect of us is projected out and sensed by those around us. And so becoming you, becoming authentic, becoming whole as a person yourself is the most important thing that you can do with your life. And so I love working with people on the physical aspect, the physical side of things, because that seems like a safe way for people to start becoming vulnerable about all the other aspects of their life, because I want to see whole, beautiful people being exactly who they are. But anyway, hopefully you found that encouraging. My story is definitely not over. I am always learning and growing and healing. There's a lot that I'm working on, and getting ready to dive into some new coaching for me getting some coaching, so I can continue to grow and improve and heal and expand. So share your story. Tell me what you've been experiencing and how you've grown. Catch you soon.